The United States is broke.
Europe is headed in a totally disastrous direction.
The fact is, it has helped to create an opportunity for Canada. Thank you all for coming tonight. The origin of the evening was when a friend of mine sent me a YouTube extract from one of Nigel's many interventions in the famous European Parliament of Strasbourg, the only parliament in the history of the world with more interpreters than members. And I sent it out to scores of people with the message, if you can watch this, it was about a 3 or 4 minute clip, if you can watch this with a straight face, I'll give you 100, whatever, dollars or pounds, whatever it was, you see. Everyone sent back, you keep your money, this man is a scream.
You know, I remember being here 10 years ago and hearing the launch of the Lisbon Agenda. We were told that with the euro by 2010 we would have full employment and indeed that Europe would be the competitive and dynamic powerhouse of the world. By any objective criteria, the euro has failed and in fact there is a looming impending disaster. You know, this deal makes things worse, not better. 100 billion is put up for the Spanish banking system and 20% of that money has to come from Italy. And under the deal, the Italians have to lend to the Spanish banks at 3%, but to get that money, they have to borrow on the markets at 7%. It's genius, isn't it? It really is brilliant. So what we're doing with this package is we're actually driving countries like Italy towards needing to be bailed out themselves.
Now, the fact is, he's not only humorous, he is widely regarded as the most impressive of the four party leaders. He is one of the founders of the UK Independence Party. He withdrew from the Conservative Party when the government of John Major signed the Maastricht Treaty. Everything he said about the Maastricht Treaty was correct and has been proved correct and is now backed by the great majority of the British public. His party is widely expected to win the next European elections.
We pay £53 million a day to be a member of this organisation for no benefit whatsoever. Mr Cameron, when you come back from this Brussels summit, why don't you accept my challenge and let's have a proper, full debate in Britain on whether it's worth staying a member of this union or not. The last opinion polls over the weekend show that now by a majority of 2 to 1, the British people now want us to leave this union and not to pay you a penny piece. Thank you.
Because of the shambles of Europe, which Nigel is I think, unquestionably the most articulate commentator on, commentator/participant in the proceedings of Europe, and because of an astonishing disintegration of the quality of American public policy in the last 10 or 12 years, which Mark Stein will comment on. These are not matters that we as Canadians particularly rejoice in for themselves, but they do help create, along with positive developments intrinsic to this country, increased opportunities for Canada in the world.
It's anger that got me into politics at the idea that Britain was about to become a province of a new European state that wasn't even going to be run by people that we could vote for and elect.
Who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you. I would like to ask you, President, who voted for you?
Conrad asked me to talk about the situation facing the United States today. Basically, much of the Western world has been engaged in recent decades in a form of synchronized suicide. The Europeans and the Americans have both been able to do that under kind of different delusions. Europe, because it had always thought the Americans, since the Second World War, would be there to guarantee its freedom, no matter what stupidity it engaged in. And the United States made the mistake, I think, of thinking that its 1950 moment of preeminence was forever. And it's beginning to understand now that it is not. The United States is broke. It's broker than anyone has ever been, ever. Washington has to repay, officially, $16 trillion just to get back to having nothing at all.
I am seriously shocked at the mismanagement in the United States. I mean, look, I don't want to sound anti-American, but when you run these colossal deficits, I mean, you know, in 232 years of American history, they built up a deficit of $10 trillion. And in the last 3.5 years, they've moved it up from 10 trillion to 16 trillion. And of that, about 70% of the debt is taken up not by issuing bonds sold at arm's length to serious buyers, but by a subsidiary of the U.S. Treasury, the central bank, the Federal Reserve, buying them with these notes that are just issued in emails, like us emailing each other. It's a shell game. You can't do that. When the United States triumphed, when it won the greatest, most bloodless strategic victory in the history of the world, inexplicably, absolutely unforeseeably, it suddenly became, in public policy terms, an utterly incompetent country. There is no other explanation for the admission of 20 million unskilled illegal immigrants while outsourcing 60 million low-paying jobs, borrowing trillions of dollars from China and Japan to buy from China and Japan what the United States formerly made for itself, sitting like a great suet pudding while oil imports went from 10% of requirements under President Eisenhower to 60% under George W. Bush. And as a crowning achievement, and that's too mocking, but as, again, an absolutely unforeseeable afterpiece to this, the inundation of the world with this worthless real estate debt, which Wall Street squandered the prestige it had earned since Mr. Morgan's time by certifying as investment grade. No one, I suggest, could possibly have imagined that the United States, which had been so successful, of course there were mistakes like Vietnam, but in general so tremendously successful, could have suddenly hit such a series of terrible mistakes.
So we were at a crunch time for the United States. Obama himself, Barack Obama, the current president, he didn't create this problem, but he has accelerated it. In the last 4 years, he has added $6 trillion to the national debt. $6 trillion. No one in the history of this planet has ever spent $6 trillion. Anyone here spent $6 trillion that they don't have. Conrad got accused of that, I think, actually, and I think his friends in Fleet Street would say Barbara had spent it or whatever. But anyway, I won't go there. But he did something even more unprecedented. Barack Obama spent $6 trillion and left no trace. No one can see where a dollar of that money has gone. The spending it's not a bookkeeping issue, it's a moral issue. When you loot the future to bribe the present, which is what Western societies have done, you are engaging in something profoundly wicked. In Europe, the problem is a demographic one. You know, Greece has an upside-down family tree. 100 grandparents have 42 grandchildren. And that fact is the only thing you need to know about Greek debt. Is it likely that the debts run up by 100 people are going to be repaid by 42 people? I think most people, if they think about that for a moment, know the answer to it. Now, America doesn't have that same kind of deathbed demography that most European countries have. But it has demographic and human capital issues of its own. We often hear that all this talk about how, oh, if somebody from a century ago came back today, they'd be amazed by the flat screen TV and the computer and the iPhone and all the rest of it. That's not true. If any American citizen, average American from 1912, came back to the typical American Main Street, they would be amazed by how large and how sick so many Americans look. If you make it up to 60, 70, your life expectancy in the United States and your quality of life is higher than anywhere else on Earth. So to the point where they had to create a state just for old people, which is what Florida is. Nobody else has ever had to do that before. So it has the healthiest old people on the planet, apart from Japan, and it has the sickest young people with astonishing rates of childhood obesity and diabetes. That's a human tragedy. And the idea that that is not relevant to America's future, the abuse of its human capital, which is what big government really is about, the real evil of big government is not the waste of money, but ultimately the waste of people. And that is an issue for the United States too.
Once India and China, representing about 40% of the world's population, became addicted to economic growth, multiple resource countries like Canada and Australia suddenly became the top economies. It used to be that it never happened that you had forest products, energy, base metals, and precious metals all clicking at the same time. But now they are. With that buying pressure from these huge growing economies, Canada's a greater land of opportunity than ever was. None of us should rejoice in any other country's difficulties, and I certainly do not. The fact is, it has helped to create an opportunity for Canada. I think that, Nigel, the one area we might disagree on is about the German Chancellor. My theory, which no reason you would know this, because it hasn't received very wide currency, indeed I don't know anyone else who agrees with me, is that Chancellor Merkel is Bismarck in drag. She is going to succeed by benignity and prudence and an inoffensive but solid, and you, despite his views of Europe, Nigel has a German wife and says he's aware of the dangers of a German-dominated household. This chemist, who is the daughter of a Lutheran minister in the former communist state of East Germany, if you can imagine a less promising occupation, is creating a greater Germany by voluntarism and example. And it is working, where the tramping armies of Germany of the past did not. And I think we'll end up with a very powerful German-led core, and the rest a common market of essentially relatively subservient or secondary states, including France, which after a long and astonishing history has just walked off the diving board into an empty swimming pool with a totally unqualified president who, as I had occasion to say on television a few weeks ago here, is the most unpromising leader in all of French history, not excluding Louis the Fat, Louis the Bald, and Louis the Simple.
So what of Europe? What is going on? Well, I of course have been called the greatest Eurosceptic of all. This in fact is not true. I am not in the least bit doubtful that Europe is headed in a totally disastrous direction, now led by very, very bad people whose intention is to crush and destroy the nation state, democracy, and the ability of voters to hire and fire their leaders. But in 2005, everything changed in Europe. Suddenly, there was a constitution, and it was put to referendums in France and in the Netherlands. The French said no. A few days later, the Dutch overwhelmingly said no. And there's no doubt the Germans would have said no. The Finns would have said no. The Brits would have said no. The Danes would have said no. Nearly everybody, apart from Belgium, which isn't really a country at all, but I get into trouble when I say that. But apart from Belgium and Luxembourg, frankly, almost everybody would have said no to a European constitution, because nobody in Europe actually wants to become a European. There is no European demos. It doesn't exist now. I don't believe it ever will in the future. But I saw the response to that, and I saw them within a week boasting, well, the Constitution's gone. We're now going to rename it, rebrand it as the Lisbon Treaty, which means we won't need to have any more referendums. And I realized then what bad people they were. Well, that was it for me. My one-man wrecking mission against all things European Union and all their officers began in earnest. And I became the leader of a group in the European Parliament. And, of course, I have that front row seat. Some may have seen it on YouTube. And it's delicious. I'm seat number 20, and Barroso's seat number 21. I mean, you couldn't make it up, really, could you?
You completely ignored the State of the Union. You said how you felt things were going. You pointed your way forwards. The Eurobarometer poll, the Commission's own polling organisation, tells us the truth, and it tells us that in the last 6 months there has been a dramatic drop in confidence in people's belief even in belonging to the Union. A 10% drop in Germany, a 17% drop in Greece, a 9% drop in Portugal, and less than half of EU citizens think that being a member of the club is worth it. Even more revealing is that in your own country of Portugal, in the last 6 months, a further 1 in 4 people have lost total faith in EU institutions. That, Mr Barroso, is hardly an endorsement of success.
European project, folks, is mad, bad and wrong. Those countries will leave the Eurozone, but it's going to be a slow, long, agonising death, so great is the political will to stay with it. But what nobody has noticed is that a huge gap has opened up over the last 2 or 3 years between France and Germany. A massive competitiveness gap. What of Britain? We're leaving. We're not staying part of this union. However much Cameron and our political class want to keep us there, we are not staying. And that, for us, opens up bigger, broader and more fascinating horizons.
You are a relatively small country with a monstrous country next door, huge country next door, which is a vital part for you in terms of trade and everything else. And yet, compare that to my country. We're a relatively small country with a huge, monstrous group of countries called Europe next to us. What we've done is we've decided we're too small, we're too useless, we can't possibly cope. Let's give away the control and management of our country to a group of officials based in Brussels. It's rather like Canadians saying, I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's get the US State Department in future to run the rest of Canada. Nobody in this country wants to do that. Nobody in my country should want to do what we've done.
Canada has the standing and the credibility to take a lead in demanding the reform of the United Nations, which has become an utter disgrace, just a sinkhole corruption and hypocrisy, and NATO, which is a farce. The coalition of the willing. It means those who want a military guarantee from the United States are prepared to send up to 1,000 soldiers to harebrained American projects around the world. It isn't the alliance that we in Canada and Britain and the United States and a few other countries started.
I do remind myself that what we have in this Commonwealth is a group of countries with vast amounts in common. Legal systems, accountancy systems, language, shared history, in many cases, kith and kin. We've got to re-engage with the Commonwealth. We've got to get something special going with the Commonwealth. So what are we going to do? Well, I don't think I don't think that it is for the United Kingdom to be the country that suggests what this new makeup will be. I think it's got to come from you guys. I think it's got to come from Canada. I think it's got to come from Australia, New Zealand, and I think India, Conrad. For this to work, I think India must be part. If this is going to be serious, what we're talking about here, India must be part of the mix. 2 words of caution. The first is it cannot be called the Commonwealth, because much as the word Commonwealth appeals to all of us that believe in that spirit of Vimy Ridge, I'm afraid the word, the association of that word is still that somehow it's a hangover, it's a relic from something that's gone past. And if you guys come up with the right solution, we in UKIP will adopt it as party policy, and as we've done with everything else in British politics, we'll make it the overwhelming mainstream view of my country.
Because of the Eurozone crisis, we in Britain are now saying to ourselves, should we really be part of this European project? Or should we, and could we, and this is the position of my party, be looking towards the old Commonwealth countries with whom we share a language, we share a history, we're kith and kin, we're related, we're friends, we do things together, we wear poppies, and we have common law, similar accounting systems. And what we did 40 years ago is we turned our back on countries like Canada, Australia and New Zealand, deciding that France and Germany was our future. Well, now we're ready